Italy, 1944 to 1945. The fighting is ending, but the consequences are just beginning. Across quarries and prison courtyards, men once protected by ideology and authority are brought to face with judgment. Some were young operatives, others commanded fear across entire cities. All believed at one point that the system they served would endure. This film follows three final reckonings, from Italo Ples to Pietro Caruso to Pietro Koch, and the moment when power ran out.
Welcome to World War Lore. If you haven't already, subscribe and turn on the bell icon for notifications.
In April 1944, near Naples, Italo Ples stood bound to a wooden post, bare-chested and unflinching, a cigarette raised calmly between his fingers. Defiance, not fear, marked his final moments. Ples was one of four young fascist operatives from the Italian Social Republic who had been parachuted behind Allied lines. Captured in territory under Allied control, they were charged with espionage and sabotage. A United States Army military tribunal found them guilty and sentenced them to death. That spring day, at a quarry near Sant'Angelo a Fasanella, their final minutes unfolded amid the stark symbolism of a country tearing itself apart. Youthful resolve and ideological obsession merged into a grim scene of punishment and consequence. When the rifles fired, the four men fell, living emblems of a collapsing regime brought to its end. The image of Italo Ples, cigarette lit and gaze steady, would linger long after the echoes faded, becoming one of the most unsettling visual records of Italy's violent and divided wartime years. Ples asked for little before the end: one final cigarette and the right to face death without a blindfold. Knowing your time had come, what would you choose to ask for? On the morning of September 22, 1944, in the enclosed courtyard of Forte Bravetta prison, Pietro Caruso faced a firing squad. Once the feared chief of police in occupied Rome, he now stood restrained and wordless, condemned for crimes that had soaked the city in blood. Power that had once flowed freely through his hands was gone, replaced by silence and judgment. Caruso's ascent was inseparable from fascism. A devoted loyalist to Benito Mussolini, he climbed steadily through Italians' police and security ranks. By the time Nazi Germany occupied Italy in 1943, Caruso had reached the position of Rome's police chief. From there, he became an eager collaborator with the Gestapo, enforcing occupation with ruthless efficiency. His name became permanently tied to one of Italy's darkest wartime crimes, the Ardeatine massacre of March 1944. After a partisan attack killed 33 German soldiers in Rome, Nazi and fascist authorities ordered a savage reprisal. Caruso played a direct role, helping compile the list of victims: 335 Italian civilians and political prisoners, selected arbitrarily and executed in secret. Working closely with SS officer Herbert Kappler, Caruso ensured the killings were carried out quickly, quietly, and without mercy. The massacre stunned even committed supporters of the regime. Families searched desperately for missing relatives, unaware they had already been murdered and concealed in caves beyond the city. When the truth emerged, it became one of the most indelible horrors of Italy's wartime history, and Caruso's involvement was unmistakable. After Rome fell and Allied forces liberated the city, Caruso attempted to vanish into obscurity. But his crimes were too public, his reputation too infamous. Italian partisans arrested him and handed him over to authorities. His trial moved swiftly and unfolded in full view of the public. Before an Italian military tribunal, witnesses recounted his cruelty and arrogance. He had not merely followed Nazi orders, he had embraced cooperation with zeal. Questioned about the massacre, Caruso defended it as a necessary act. The court rejected that claim outright. To them, it was mass murder. The verdict was death. At dawn, on September 22, 1944, Caruso was escorted into the prison courtyard. There were no spectators, no speeches, no ceremony, only a line of soldiers and the weight of finality. When the rifles fired, he fell without uttering a word. The execution was brief, impersonal, and absolute. Today, Pietro Caruso is remembered neither as a soldier nor a patriot, but as a symbol of fascist cruelty, a man who transformed police authority into an instrument of terror and who ultimately paid for it with his life. On the morning of June 5, 1945, beneath a clear sky near Forte Bravetta prison, Pietro Koch stood before what remained of Italy's justice system. Just 26 years old, the former lieutenant, once one of the most feared figures in occupied Rome, now awaited judgment for crimes that had scarred the capital. Koch was born in 1918 in Benevento. He briefly served in the Royal Italian Army before the Second World War, but his trajectory changed after 1943, when he pledged himself to the Italian Social Republic. Rising rapidly within the Republican police, he transformed from a law student into the commander of a ruthless anti-partisan force. In early 1944, under the protection of SS officer Herbert Kappler, Koch created what became known as the Banda Koch. Operating in Rome with near total authority, the unit raided safe houses, forced entry into convents, and hunted partisans and Jews. They were feared not as ordinary police, but as agents of terror, operating in secrecy and beyond restraint. Koch personally directed interrogations at a covert detention site in April 1944, where prisoners from all walks of life, intellectuals, clergy, and women among them, were subjected to intimidation and cruelty designed to break resistance. By the time Allied troops entered Rome, the Banda Koch had left a legacy of fear that lingered across the city. Koch fled north to Milan, continuing his campaign there, and even turning against fellow fascists who opposed his excesses. His unchecked power bred enemies. In October 1944, Mussolini's own government arrested him for uncontrolled violence. Soon after, Italian partisans captured Koch and transferred him to Allied custody. His trial began swiftly in June 1945 at Sapienza University of Rome. The proceedings lasted only hours. Senior police officials testified to his crimes, as did victims who survived his detention. Among them was film director Luchino Visconti, who described the cruelty he endured. The portrait that emerged was of a man who wielded suffering as power. After a final appeal from his defense, the judges found Koch guilty of war crimes and murder. Now, in the prison courtyard, he waited, bound, silent, composed. Moments later, soldiers raised their rifles. Pietro Koch died as a traitor, executed without ceremony, his end marking the final chapter of a man who had turned authority into terror. Their executions did not close Italy's wartime wounds. They simply marked the point where authority collapsed and responsibility could no longer be avoided. These men did not fall in battle. They were judged after the fact, by courts, by witnesses, and by a country forced to confront what had been done in its name. What remains are images, records, and unanswered questions about loyalty, belief, and where obedience ends.